Dávid Szabó a színpadon, angol nyelven.
Hi. Let me ask you a question. Please put your hands up if you've ever slept in a stranger's apartment, someone you've never met before, someone you never knew. And I'm not interested in the one-night stands. Just put your hands up if you've ever slept at a stranger's home. Okay. Let me rephrase the question. Put your hands up if you've ever used Airbnb. What I'm going to talk about is how to design for trust. The only difference between saying I'm sleeping at a stranger's home and saying I'm using Airbnb is that Airbnb as a technology platform has used technology to design for trust. You trust in your host because of the system that Airbnb is and how it's structured. I spent the majority of the last 10 years working on and launching and designing digital products. And in the last 2 years, I spent my time mostly in the blockchain space. I've met with over 300 founders and developers from all around the world. I've even helped launch and design a couple dozen of these projects even. A few of them you also happen to know here in Hungary, like Inlock. And the reason why I brought this example from Airbnb is because Airbnb, even though it has nothing to do with blockchain, it has everything to do with trust. And we've already seen from Nick's presentation earlier today that trust has everything to do with blockchain, or blockchain has everything to do with trust. When I moved to the UK a couple of years ago, I spent the first few nights in London at an art producer's home called Lucy. And just like the people who put their hands up, I never met Lucy before, and I have no idea what happened to Lucy after I left. But even so, she gave me coffee, we had breakfast, we had great conversation. She was a terrific host. I trusted her because of technology. And I find this whole concept really fascinating. How to use technology to establish trust between strangers. So I would like to invite all of us to join me in my journey to figure out how to use a set of principles or methodologies to design products for trust. Because I believe that blockchain and tokenization has a leading role in this revolution. Because fundamentally speaking, we do not trust each other. This is evolutionary, but also, if you remember when you first went down to the playground, what's the first advice your mother gives you? Don't trust strangers. And the reason for that is that, as I said, it's evolutionary. Because hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was just simply safer not to trust that the person who says there is no tiger behind that rock, it was safer for you to think that that person is lying. Because the consequences of misplaced trust were fatal. So in order to establish trust between each other, we started building institutions, middlemen, governments, banks, service providers, agencies. And that has a maintenance cost. Trust is a tax on just maintaining our society. All Airbnb did against the whole, compared to the hotel industry, is that they figure out a way to establish the same level of trust, but at a lot lower cost, so they could disrupt the industry. You still pay the trust tax, but the tax is lower because of technology. All tokenization does, and all this whole new revolution of this technology does, is gives you a framework, a tool to use to design for trust at scale. Because tokenization allows us for design for trust as a service. So you can start finding problems that arise from people not trusting in each other, and then you can tokenize those relationships. So you can incentivize the right people with the right types of incentives. And then you can start designing products that solve real problems in the real world, that has real use cases using technology, using blockchain, using tokenization. So going back to Airbnb, because if I say blockchain has a user experience problem, who disagrees with me? I see one hand. Okay, let's talk after the presentation. In 2007, when Airbnb launched, they had a huge user experience problem. For 2 years, they needed to sell boxes of cereals to make ends meet, eat the leftover cereals, until they met Paul Graham, who was the founder of the infamous accelerator Y Combinator. And 2 years later, when they met Paul, the first response Paul said, "Are you guys nuts? Who on earth would want to sleep in a stranger's house? More importantly, who the hell wants to let someone else inside their homes to sleep with them?" He thought it was crazy. Fast forward 10 years, and Airbnb is the largest hospitality company in the world, with tens of billions of dollars in valuation, that has literally zero real estate in their assets. Today, blockchain has the same user experience problem. People do not trust the technology. And as we established, people do not trust each other. Most of the projects out there who claim to use blockchain technology are solutions looking for a problem. And for those solutions that actually solve a problem, you basically need a computer science degree to know what you're doing. It's not easy. It's hard. So I started to look for ways in which we could actually design solutions, go out in the real world, start looking for problems, and see if there is a way to identify problems that can be solved or should be solved through tokenization, and distinguish them from problems that should be solved, but not necessarily through tokenization or blockchain. And I find basically two principles. One is simple. People need to trust what you build. This has nothing to do with blockchain. You just need to build a product people will love. This is basic product design principle. But you also need to design a product, just like Airbnb did, and they didn't use tokens or blockchain, to make them trust each other more. So I started to look for projects where the main solution that you build is for people to trust each other while they fundamentally wouldn't. So let's talk about the principles on how to design for trust in your product, because that's the easy part, right? One of the most famous methodologies is called the design sprint. It's a time-boxed approach. Within 5 days, you try to understand the problem, you sketch a solution, you build a prototype, and then you put it in front of a few users, a few potential customers to figure out if they want to use it or not. The user, the person that you solve that problem for, is the judge, jury, and executioner of the product. Design sprint is a fairly known principle and methodology. It was built by Jake Knapp at Google Ventures, and it's been immensely successful in the last 2-3 years. But the question is, how do you build for trust, and how do you design for trust for people to trust in each other? And to be a bit hyperbolic, I'm going to call this the token sprint. And the token sprint needs to come before you actually start designing a product, because all you do within a token sprint is you do research. You need 20, 30 people who are different types of people and presumably have the problems that you are trying to solve. So step 1, find the problem. Step 2, figure out where that problem is coming from. And again, you're looking for problems when people do not trust each other. And then you have technology, you have institutions that build that trust. So how do you buy power when there is no utility company? How do you automate? Why are insurance claims so long? Once you understand who the people are that are having the problems, you can start asking a bunch of questions about them. For example, how do you solve those problems right now? You start slowly to understand the relationships between a small enclosed economy of 2, 3 different participants, agents, if you like. How do they communicate with each other? What types of information do they share with each other? You want to understand what are the different interactions they have between each other. Because then you will have an understanding of where does trust erode. And then you can start understanding the flow of information as the problem is being solved. Once you have everything put together in one, you can build a blueprint. And that blueprint is going to be your map, your guide to build a product that solves a real problem by establishing trust between participants of an economy. And that's what, once you have the blueprint, you will know if you need a blockchain, if you need tokenization, if you need incentive design to build that product. 80% of the case, you don't. But those 20% of the case, that's what's going to change the world. So in order for you to design for trust, you need to design products that people will trust, and you need to design mechanisms that will make people trust each other. Or in other words, you basically combine the principles of the design sprint and you combine the principles of the token sprint to design for trust. And this is when things get interesting. Because as a product manager, tokenization gives me an opportunity to easily design for trust and solve problems that were deemed unsolvable before. It's like permanent Christmas, because there's a bunch of hard problems that I can finally solve. And I see the same spark in the eyes of those hundreds of founders I meet regularly. Because you cannot just simply have a hospitality company that has no properties, or, as we've seen, have banking services without banks. But you can also do things like, how do you buy power if there is no utility company? This is a real project. This is a real company allowing 50 million people in South India to buy electricity from the local power grid without actually having a utility company that reconciliates payments. Everything is done through smart contracts. 50 million people, they didn't have electricity before. Talk about impact. Everything I just said is very abstract. It's very theoretical. So in a couple of, I think, roughly about an hour, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, I'm going to do a workshop down one floor. We're going to design a DApp store together. So if you want to see how the token sprint works and how the token sprint works in actual steps, come join us at 2:30, and we're going to do it together. Thank you.